public spending surge, the so-called fiscal stimulus, is running out. But the overhanging problem of too much debt and too many unsold houses has not been solved. It was property loans that brought America down, and it is property debts that are still dragging the country's economy to its knees. President Obama has spent $28 billion of taxpayers' money on a program to avoid foreclosures against those who can't pay their mortgages.
Well, what's wrong with the USA is we just spent $1.5 trillion a year for 2 years pretending we had a business cycle economic crisis when we have a structural economic crisis. For 30 years, middle-class wages haven't paid enough for middle-class lives, and we borrowed the difference. We can't borrow any more money, and we're having trouble paying back the money we borrowed for the last 20 years. And so wages have to rise, people have to buy less, life has to change. That takes a long time.
And time is working against them. The figure $787 billion is burned into the political consciousness of Americans. That's the amount Congress agreed to let the president spend on fiscal stimulus. The administration claims it saved or created at least 2.5 million jobs, but that still leaves unemployment at nearly 15 million. Plus, the Federal Reserve has printed money to the tune of $1.75 trillion under quantitative easing, but that's not working either. So what else can they do?
Not much in the way of policy intervention. There is not much left to do. We've exhausted most of the fiscal policy tools, the tax spending measures that were the big feature of 2009. That's pretty much all behind us. The Federal Reserve has interest rates at effectively zero. There's not much further they can do there. They can certainly bring in more quantitative easing if they want, but as Bernanke almost seems to be suggesting himself, there's not really much point. It wouldn't do a great deal.
Today, Ben Bernanke, the boss of the Federal Reserve, spelled out the options in a speech behind closed doors at the Jackson Hole conference deep in the mountains of Wyoming. The first option is more quantitative easing. The second is to state publicly that interest rates should remain close to zero for much longer than expected. The third is to countenance much higher inflation. Now, each of these moves is unconventional, and Bernanke said they probably wouldn't make much difference, but then he said he might do them if America was threatened with deflation, which many think it is. So it begins to look like policy paralysis, and we've been there before.
We're already seeing a situation in the United States where, just like in the Great Depression, the worsening period, not the recovery period, states and localities are letting people go. Towns in the United States are firing firefighters and teachers and lunch ladies and cops, and that's having a restriction or a reducing effect in the economy. Meanwhile, the federal government is paralyzed and is not interested in doing more because the political debate has turned from recovery to deficit discussion, and everyone is scrambling to show that they can cut government spending more than the next guy.
A technical double dip, where the economy begins to shrink again for 6 months, is still unlikely, say most experts. But beyond the technicalities, the recovery in the US already feels like it's running out of momentum. Americans now look back bitterly at the billions thrown at Wall Street 2 years ago and forward to the elections of November 2nd, which may see the Democrats lose their majority in the House of Representatives. If that happens, all talk of a further stimulus out of Washington becomes academic.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, for more on this, I'm joined from Connecticut by the Republican economic commentator Peter Schiff, and from California by Professor Laura Tyson, who's an economic advisor to President Obama. Professor Tyson, has the Obama administration got it wrong, that the economic stimulus just hasn't worked?
You know, I don't think you have to ask the administration. I think if you go to the private forecasters of the United States, the most outstanding agencies, have said, yes, it has worked. It is working. It's created about 3 million more jobs than the economy would have had otherwise. It's added a couple of percentage points to the GDP growth rate. It's probably going to add about 500,000 more jobs through the end of this year. The problem is that the economy is so weak and the private sector has been shedding jobs at a faster rate than the creation of jobs that has come through the stimulus. I think it is really important for people to understand that it has been working, because part of the paralysis now that I heard you mention is that people feel there's nothing the federal government can do. But the federal government has been doing a lot.
Peter Schiff, the federal government is not a pitiful, helpless giant. It's been doing the right thing. It just needs to do perhaps more of it.
Now, they have been doing a lot. Unfortunately, they've been doing a lot of damage. You know, these private forecasters that Ms. Tyson is referring to, these are the same guys that missed this recession in the first place. And since they didn't understand the economy back in 2007, they don't understand it today. The stimulus is the problem. We stimulated our way into a housing bubble. The more the government stimulates the economy, the more they sedate it. Because as the stimulus wears off, we find that we've dug ourselves into a deeper hole. We have to let the government stop stimulating the economy so that it can actually repair the damage that past stimulus has inflicted on us. We need to replenish our savings. We need to invest more. We need to produce more. We need to allow this phony consumer spending-based economy that is a function of government stimulus to collapse so that a real economy can take its place. If not, we're just going to extend this depression indefinitely, and we're going to interrupt it briefly by little spats of GDP growth as we spend more borrowed money. But the consequence of that is the stimulus wears off, and now we're in worse shape. And we're never going to get out of this hole until we have a 180-degree change in policy.
Professor Tyson, the medicine is contributing to the disease, Mr. Schiff is basically saying.
Well, I think he even said the medicine caused the disease. By the way, many of the forecasters I was talking about actually did predict what was going to happen, so it's really not fair to say that these forecasters got it wrong one time, they're getting it wrong another time. So that's the first point. The second point is, I don't think I've heard exactly how the stimulus package has actually caused the problem. Let's take the issue of tax cuts. Let's take and I ask you that. Tax cuts are about a third of the stimulus package. So shall we not have tax cuts during a period of economic slowdown?
Yeah, I didn't say that the Obama stimulus caused the problem. It's making the problem worse. It was caused by the Bush stimulus, by the Greenspan stimulus. Bernanke is repeating the same mistakes as his predecessor. Remember, when we had a recession in 2001, as we were trying to unwind the stock market bubble, what did we do? We stimulated the economy with cheap money, with deficit spending. The result of that was the spending binge, the borrowing binge, all the reckless gambling. That's what caused it.
Let me ask you both, Laura Tyson. I mean, do you see there has been some good news this week out of Germany. Germany seems to be doing well. Some of the European economies are doing a little better than expected. They're also introducing austerity packages. That's completely different from Obama policy, isn't it?
Well, I would say that we'll wait and see. They've talked about austerity packages, and so far, really, nothing's been done. So this is a pledge for future austerity. Let me say, in the case of Germany, a very interesting two points here. One is that most of that oomph has come not from the German consumer, not from Germany itself, but from emerging market demand for things that Germany makes. That's an export strategy. Germany is not providing demand to Europe. It's basically getting demand to Europe through the emerging markets. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, interestingly enough, Germany had a very big stimulus package, which included measures to subsidize big firms to keep their workforce in place. That turns out to have been a sensible policy.
Number one, all these countries that have stimulus policies, they would be better off without them. And the government creates a stimulus, and then the economy gets better on its own, and then they claim credit for it. Most of these recoveries would be stronger absent the stimulus. But when you're talking about Germany, manufacturing and production, that's a real economy. What we do is phony. All we do is buy what other people make. We don't have a real economy. It depends on the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is going to recover because this was an American crisis. The problem is America lived beyond its means. We borrowed too much money, and now it's obvious that we can't pay it back. The world, as our bankers, suffered a hit, but the global economy will repair itself. It will continue to grow, particularly in Asia. But the United States, it's very different.
Let me ask Professor Tyson on that point. I mean, you know, the great investment guru Warren Buffett once said, you know, when the tide goes out, you see who's been bathing naked. I mean, the implication of this conversation, at least from Mr. Schiff's point of view, is the United States is one of those who's been bathing naked.
Well, I would like to point out that basically just a few years ago, if we look at the period 1996 to 2002, look at U.S. productivity growth, you look at U.S. unemployment rates, look at U.S. manufacturing strength and high technology. Just a few years ago, the U.S. was, in fact, the envy of the production world. Yes, we are in a production slump right now, no doubt, and it was caused by a housing bubble, and that housing bubble was fed by an inappropriate cost for housing. I don't disagree with that that at all. I would point out, however, that the funders of this came from around the world, and these were from countries that said, you know what, we're going to produce and we're not going to consume, and we're going to depend upon the U.S. to generate
Peter Schiff,
demand.
just a brief final word.
It takes two to tango.
This is a dysfunctional marriage. This is a dysfunctional marriage.
Yes.
It's a dysfunctional marriage.
Yes, I do fault the rest of the world for giving us the rope to hang ourselves with. I do blame, the drug pusher for pushing the drugs on America. But I do take issue with how you described the latter part of the last decade, because a lot of that productivity was a function of hedonics associated with the way we counted our GDP during the technology boom. I think a lot of that productivity was phony. It was government accounting, and it was part of a boom that was also fed by a Federal Reserve under Alan Greenspan that was too easy, and that was a bubble. And when that bubble burst, we found out that a lot of that productivity was not real.
Peter Schiff, Laura Tyson, thank you both very much.